Hi BookTube, Aaron here, hope you're doing okay. Today I'm going to be wrapping up everything that I read in the month of March. Normally in a video like this I'd also go through my reading plans for the next month, but March was quite a busy reading month, so I decided to keep my reading plans separate, so I've already filmed a separate video for that, so if you want to watch it I'll try to link it in the description so you can go and find it if you want to. So yeah, today it's just a wrap up for March, and yeah, March was a very productive reading month. I read 12 books in March, and yeah, I'll get into why I read so many books. I normally read, I don't know, probably about 5 or 6 on average. But before I get into any of that, I'll go through some of the sort of reading stats and the sort of challenges that I've set myself this year. And the first of those will be my alphabet challenge. So I'm trying to read a book by an author for every letter of the alphabet. And so far I've kind of covered 15 letters so far. So this year I've read 25 books, and so that's all. So every author is kind of spread over 15 letters, which is pretty cool. It's a nice spread so far. So past the halfway mark on that challenge. I've also been keeping a track of sort of where the authors came from and what languages they were writing in. So in terms of the countries, the one with the highest number of authors so far is the US. So there's 9 books from the US, 5 from the UK, 3 from France, and then just 1 book from New Zealand, Argentina, Finland, Norway, Russia, Portugal, Ancient Rome, and I've put 1 down as Czech Republic, and that's kind of going off the modern geography, not of when the book was written. And then in terms of language, then we've got English with 15 books, French with 3 books, and then 1 book for Spanish, Portuguese, Latin, Norwegian, German, Russian, and Finnish. So yeah, I'm quite pleased with where it's going. I'm getting a nice spread of languages. It's still pretty much just Northern European languages, but they weren't all living in the north of Europe when they were writing. So yeah, we'll see where it goes with the rest of the year. And then the last little thing that I've been keeping track of is the number of books that I've been buying, and that's just physical books. And then I'm keeping track of how many of those books I read in the year. So as of filming this, I've bought 21 books this year, which is still less than the number total I've read this year. And of those 21 books that I've read, that I've bought, I've read 4 of them. So yeah, we'll see how it equals out in the year. I don't want to necessarily read all of them by the end of the year, but it's just interesting to see, I suppose, how imminent I feel, how imminently I feel I have to read these books after buying them. So again, it's just interesting for me. So sorry if that bit was a bit boring. But I'll get into the books themselves, and I think I'll start off with the reading events and sort of things associated with the books. So I'll start off with the BookTube prize, and I read 5 books for the BookTube prize this month. I kind of procrastinated a bit, so I'd been given Group A for the fiction for the octafinals, so I had 2 months to read 6 books, and I procrastinated, so I only read 1 in February. So I ended up reading 5 in March, which, to be honest, if you have already seen my my reading plans for April, I'm kind of slowing down a bit, or just approaching my reading in a little more of a relaxed manner. That's kind of resulting in just the kind of pressure I had to put on myself to finish the books for the BookTube prize, and it wasn't that bad, it wasn't debilitating, it wasn't causing masses of anxiety or anything. It was just slightly too much pressure for something that I do for fun. And so, yeah, I'm just sort of trying to counterbalance that in April. But with all that said, the 5 books that I read for the BookTube Prize, and I will just skim through them now because I'll make a separate video about what I thought of them. I read Liberation Day by George Saunders. This is the only one where I had the physical book. And then on my Kindle, I read, if I can remember, Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. I read Our Missing Hearts by Celeste. I read How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Nagamatsu. I read The Rabbit Hutch by Tessa Hadley. So yeah, 5 books for the BookTube Prize, and they're kind of principally why the number of sort of US authors are so high on my kind of tally at the moment this year. Yeah, every book I've read this year for the BookTube Prize was from America. Even though it's they're kind of trying to include any fiction written in the English language. So it was interesting in its own way, but and definitely diverse in its own way. Yeah, that's all I'll say about those books so far. The other big reading event for March for me then was March of the Mammoths, and instead of I had these BookTube Prize books to read, and I've had a few other things I wanted to read, so I didn't want to just throw another big mammoth into the mix when I was already in the middle of Proust. So I just decided that in March, with everything going on, that I still wanted to try and make some progress in Remembrance of Things Past. And I read about 400 pages in March. So that was, pretty good going. And I've just finished the 3rd volume of Remembrance of Things Past. So that's called The Gourmand's Way. And I'll make a Proust vlog video all about that, going through some of my thoughts. So I'm just about to start Cities of the Plain, which is a very evocative title. So I'm looking forward to sort of what's going to happen and why Proust decided to call that volume Cities of the Plain. And then the only other reading events, actually no, there's 2 more reading events. So then one of the other ones that took me through the whole of March was Classics and Company. So this is a read-along hosted by Mike Cummins and Anne Novella. And from sort of the end of February through to the end of March, they were reading the Book of Disquiet by Fernando Pessoa. So I decided to reread it. It was my 2nd time. And I think I did actually prefer it the 2nd time through. Although it did make me come to the decision that I wanted to try I will want to try a different translator the next time I read it. So this, I'm not sure if you can see it, it says that the complete edition. So if you don't know, this is a book it's made out of fragments. After Fernando Pessoa died, they found just all of these fragmentary writings in a chest, in a trunk. And scholars, it took them about, 40, 50 years to piece them together, because many of them were going towards this Book of Disquiet. And this version, it tries to put them all in order, sort of in the order that they would have been written, which sounds quite cool, sounds pretty good, and it is really interesting to see how the ideas developed, because it was well over a decade that he was writing these fragments. The only kind of trouble being that you can kind of tell after a while that there are certain things that he's rewriting, that he's editing, he's revising, but you're getting all of it. And so there's another version translated by Richard Zenith, who is pretty much the guy for Pessoa at the moment. And in his version, he's trying to arrange it to kind of convey a bit of a narrative, and I think just make those thematic themes pop out a little bit more. And so I'd like to see whether it's a better kind of cover to cover read in that translation. But this one I'm still going to keep hold of. I've got loads of notes and random bits underlined in it, and it's still, I think, in whatever translation you pick up, a great book just to open on a random page and just see what it says, because it is like a well, I don't know, it's just full of so much possibility, and a lot of it is kind of navel gazing, thinking about your place in the universe or whatever, even though that the people kind of writing these fragments are kind of on the fringes or see themselves as not fully initiated into everyday life. But then there are some bits that are kind of like narratives and little short stories or poems just kind of thrown in there. And so I've kind of made notes of a few of my favourite bits that kind of stood out and seemed a bit different, so that I can go back to them and read them from time to time. And then the last of the reading events then is Historathon. So this is a year-long reading event to get people reading more history throughout the year, and it's the brainchild of Vin from Revenant Reads. And I was really curious about this event because I just really would like to read much more history, and it's been really fun. I've read 3 history books now, and well, no, have I? Maybe I've only finished 2. And I'm on my 3rd. And it's just been really, really fun, and I'm hoping to. I was thinking, maybe I would read 2 or 3 history books throughout the year, whereas now I'm thinking I'm going to try and just have a history book going, all the time. Just always have a history book that I'm dipping in and out of. And so sort of late on in March, again it was on my Kindle. I picked up Istanbul, A Tale of 3 Cities by Bettany Hughes, and it's exactly as it sounds. It's just telling you the whole story of Istanbul, Constantinople, Byzantium, whatever you'd like to call it, and it's just really so fascinating. She's it seems like the present as she's writing it is just as present as the times she's writing about, and not necessarily, you sometimes get it that a historian will kind of overuse modern analogies and idioms to kind of get a point across, or to make it, make the past feel relatable. That's not really what she's doing. Instead, and I think this is much more exciting and actually much more, I think it would get more people interested in history. She's looking at the research and the archaeology going on today, all the new or recent discoveries that are changing or just underlining our perception and our understanding of these various time periods. And she's spanning 3,000 years of history, but not only that, she's also comparing the past to the present, to this place's present. So an example would be, I was reading a section on Justinian and Theodora. So Justinian being one of sort of the most famous Byzantine emperors, and just talking about the various sort of projects they had going on in the city, and one of them was kind of the way they made sure there was provision for refugees and people coming into the city, and sort of comparing that to her as she's writing this chapter. Presumably she's in Istanbul. She's looking out the window of where she's staying, and she just sees Syrian refugees lying in the road as if they were dead, and just comparing the past to the present in that way. How just how attitudes maybe have changed, or how the world in some ways has become better, in some ways has become maybe a little crueler or less sensitive. And so that's really, really, really fascinating, and it just adds layers of life to this place, to this city. It's a really great book, and I'm only, I don't know, less than a third of the way through. And then on from there, I've been reading Lawrence Durrell's poems. So I started them again towards the end of March. As of filming this, I've just finished this. I finished it yesterday. So he's the brother of Gerald Durrell, who wrote My Family and Other Animals, and it's just really decent, very good poetry. It's sometimes very funny, very humorous. Sometimes it's quite nostalgic, or it's kind of elegy. But yeah, it's just great, and he's one of those poets that he's just steeped in sort of ancient classical writers, and all of that is coming out. But he lived in Turkey and in Egypt and in sort of all sorts of places, and so although the path to those places is very much alive to him, he's also there, in sort of a more modern Alexandria or wherever. So again, kind of like that book on Istanbul, you have those sort of layers of history and relatability to a place or to a culture. So again, really, really fun. I mean, some of them are very, very English as well. But yeah, I really enjoy reading these poems. And then I'll try to rush through the rest then. We'll see how that goes. This is just kind of the riffraff then, just books that I managed to slot in somehow. So at the very beginning of March, me and Jasmine went to Paris for a week, which was really, really lovely. And up until then, I had never read A Moveable Feast by Ernest Hemingway. And so I couldn't not read it, so I took it with me, and I was reading this, on the metro, in cafes, whenever I could. And it was a real delight. I finished it in Paris, I think the day before we left. And yeah, it was just really, really lovely. And it reminded me that, at least for me, Hemingway is one of those writers where I've kind of got to know his writing, got to know his style. And so when I come back to him, there's a kind of comfort there. It's like talking to a friend that you haven't talked to for a few years, but as soon as you've said a couple of sentences, you both kind of remember, why you have such an affinity to each other. Only, Hemingway's dead, so he can't have an affinity for me, but that's fine. And then the rest is pretty much all poetry. So if you're not into poetry, you can run away now if you haven't already. We've got the selected poems of Guillaume Apollinaire. I have no idea if I'm saying the first name right, but yeah, an early 20th century French poet, kind of surrealist, or maybe a kind of cubist poet. So I think I've shown them before, these poems that are sort of in the shapes of what they're depicting. So that was my favourite one, called It's Raining. Most of them were in sort of more traditional verse structures. I think he is one of those poets, in a way he reminds me of Dylan Thomas, as he writes these poems that have their own kind of energy and momentum to them. So even if they are, a little more surreal and you're not really understanding them, they kind of carry you through them. And every now and then you just reach these moments of emotion where there's something you can really latch onto, and then you keep going. And so yeah, there was kind of something to that in a lot of these poems, and it's something I can kind of remember from reading some of Dylan Thomas's more surreal stuff. Talking of surreal, we've got Arthur Rimbaud's collected poems. I quite liked him. Not so much really a lot of the early stuff, but right at the end, particularly when he started writing more prose poems. It's like A Season in the Hell, Illuminations, The Deserts of Love. They were really, really fun. I really liked those, and they just seemed much more visceral, much more honest to me. Yeah, I don't know whether I prefer him to Baudelaire. I think I need to read some more Baudelaire, try some different translations of both. Yeah, an intriguing poet. And then we've got 3 more to go. And I'll see if I can say her name correctly. So I read the selected poems of Marina Tsvetaeva. So she was a Russian poet. He lived through the Russian Revolution and the following terror. She moved around so much to Paris, I think to Prague, and I think she ended up in Russia eventually. It just didn't end well for her at all. She ended up in a very desperate situation. But she was a really terrific poet, and part of me, I feel sad that this isn't a facing translation, although I can't read Russian, so it's probably fine as it's in totally different characters. But just to get an idea of what her sort of stanzas, what her verse form kind of looked like, because there's something very compressed to her writing. She's a very formal poet, uses lots of rhyme schemes, but really pushes them, really squeezes them until they're really concentrated. And so it was really, really quite good. And there are some poems in here that are just really ironic and kind of teasing. It's a poem, I can't remember how long after the revolution it was written, but it's called I Love the Rich. And again, in the poem, by the time you get to the end, you kind of get that she doesn't love the rich. But again, she's writing a poem called I Love the Rich straight after the Russian Revolution, which is just great. And I just thought it was, just such a subversive and just quite funny poem. And then 2 more to go. I read the Duino Elegies by Rainer Maria Rilke. Rilke is a poet I've really been meaning to get back to this year, so I was glad to find this, and I couldn't not get it when I saw it. It's a translation by Vita and Edward Sackville West. I think they were both cousins and sort of friends, and in Vita's case, lover of Virginia Woolf. And it's just a great blank verse translation of the Duino Elegies by Rilke. So it has this kind of almost Shakespearean, heroic kind of sort of cadence to the writing, which I'm not sure if it quite matches the kind of feeling you get in Rilke. I think there's something a little more somber and sort of quiet to Rilke's own approach, but that's really just going off the Edward Snow translation, which I read first, and as I was reading this, I was going back to the Snow translation after every elegy. So I kind of ended up reading the Duino Elegies in between translations about 2 or 3 times. But it was great. It was one of those things in a really busy reading month where my focus is so much on finishing books that I could just, when I was reading this, I could just slow down, take as much time as I wanted, and just reread an elegy if I wanted to, 2 or 3 times. So yeah, that was really, really good. Still don't really know what he's talking about in here. All of the time, every now and then, there's just a line that just comes across as so profound and kind of relatable. I think part of it is him coming to terms or grieving the fact that the 20th century was becoming so materialistic, and so it's a very metaphysical poem. There's a bit where he's kind of trying to imagine what it may be like to not be in a body at all, maybe not be in time at all. But it was, yeah, it's weird, but it's really quite good, quite haunting poetry, and I might even reread whether this or the other translation of the Duino Elegies later on in the year, or maybe move on to Sonnets for Orpheus, because they're really good as well. And then finally, we've got Unfinished Ode to Mud by Francis Ponge, and so another French poet. So is that 3 French poets this month? Baudelaire, Apollinaire, no, Rimbaud, Apollinaire, and Francis Ponge. And yeah, this is really, really fun. Again, more prose poetry, very descriptive prose poetry, and like really descriptive. He just pushes description to the max, and the result is actually quite interesting. It's hard to put into words, but he was the kind of kid who would just read dictionaries and thesauruses, and that kind of does come across here. And I don't know if that sells the poems at all, but there's just this obsession with trying to get things just right, but also that kind of playfulness too, just a kid enjoying just words. And he wasn't a kid writing these, but that childlike inquisitiveness definitely carries through. So like the first poem in here called Rain, where the rain is a fine discontinuous curtain or mesh falling implacably or implacably but relatively slowly, a drizzle, a never-ending languid precipitation, an intense dose of pure meteor, and on and on and on. So yeah, not everyone's cup of tea, but I really quite liked it. And yeah, that's the end. So a very busy reading month. I had a lot going on, and as I said, I just want to slow down and kind of get more of that experience I was getting in the Duino Elegies, and I kind of got when I was reading the Book of Disquiet, which is just to slow down, reread passages if I want to, or just go over and dip into something else if I feel like maybe a story or a poem is talking to another book. Then I'm going to try and get those conversations going between books. But we'll see how that goes. It might take a while, but that's my outlook, at least for April. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.